Welcome to this edition of Simsbury School News. My name is Dominique Avery. Thanks for joining us for this show designed to give you a closer look at our schools and the people who work there. Today, my guest is Neil Sullivan. He's actually been my guest before when he was principal of Simsbury High School. He did that for 11 years, but he's back today to talk about a new job. You're director of personnel now, right?
Correct.
So I'm so glad you came back.
Thank you for having me.
You were principal of Simsbury High School for 11 years. What made you want to make the switch to join the administration, the downtown administration, as opposed to the school administration?
Well, there are times in your career where you just feel like the time is right for a change, and I think the time was right for me. I said to people, in a lot of ways, I think being the principal of Simsbury High is the best job I'll ever have. It was terrifically energizing in terms of being around our terrific students, a wonderful faculty, and I really felt like we did a great job kind of modernizing the school a little bit in terms of not only the physical plant of the school, but the curricular offerings and some of the other opportunities we gave to students during my time there, and I'm very proud of the work. But one of the things that's always interested me about my work in schools were people business. Education is primarily a people-driven business, and so the opportunity to be the director of personnel, where you really do keep active with all the employees in the school district, was a tremendous opportunity. It opened up when Sue Lemke made the move over to special education, and I had the opportunity to talk with our superintendent, Matt Curtis, about my interest in the position. Had been there for a long time. It had been the one central office position that had always piqued my interest. And through a series of conversations with Superintendent Curtis, the opportunity presented itself to interview with the board. And the transition happened after a wonderful final Simsbury High graduation under my principalship in June. Got a couple of weeks off and got going on July 1st.
So you followed Dennis Carruthers, right?
There was
somebody in between?
There was, for a couple of years, Colleen Palmer was the high school principal.
I didn't even pay attention. I was sort of not aware of that.
But Dennis Carruthers hired me as his assistant principal back in 2000, so he's a wonderful role model for me.
So shortly after, one of the first things you were involved in, or I might be wrong, was hiring your replacement. Was that true? Did you get involved in that or not?
They actually kept me a little bit at arm's length from hiring Mr. O'Brien. So I was aware of what was going on, but not directly involved at that time.
But then, just after you took over, you did have an opportunity to hire a new principal.
Correct.
Because suddenly the principal at Tooten Hills went back to his old job where he had been assistant superintendent, Kevin Cazzetta.
Yes.
And
so
the school year had already started, or just about started.
Just as the school year was starting. Everybody was certainly surprised by that move, and when I talk about it, I say including Kevin Cazzetta. Kevin was 2 years the principal of Tooten Hills School. He had been a long-time educator here in Simsbury, and had gone to be an assistant principal in Westport. And then his first principal's job was here at Tooten Hills, and I think he believed he was going to stay for a long, long time. But the opportunity, really, he was recruited back to Westport and was, essentially handed the job as principal down there. As you may know, in terms of the principal pay down in Fairfield County, I think it was an offer not only to lead a school he had been in, but pretty substantial difference in pay. He took that opportunity, and so as a result, we started very shortly after I began as the director of personnel an administrative search for a new principal at Tooten Hills School. Trial by fire.
It's interesting. Just an aside, Kevin Cazzetta had been the student teacher in my daughter's sixth grade class at Tooten Hills. So when I interviewed him, it was kind of fun.
Yeah.
So, but you ended up staying in town as well?
Yes, we did. We had a great process. It started, we gave it a few weeks. I will say that Betsy Gonzalez, who's our director of elementary curriculum, agreed to step up on incredibly short notice to open the school year as interim principal for Tooten Hills, and did a tremendous job in that role. But about a month after Kevin resigned, we went out to post. We didn't know what we would get for a pool at this time of year. It was kind of an unusual time of year to be doing a principal search, and yet we had a robust pool. A number of sitting principals, a number of people kind of looking for that first administrative job, and a number of assistant principals looking for that first principal's job. In the end, after a great process, we did stay in town. Our assistant principal at Squadron Line School, Maggie Seidel, who's been with us for 3 years, has built an incredible record up at Squadron Line. Kind of used that opportunity as a launching pad. And I think what appealed to the Tooten Hills community is that Maggie comes with experience not only as a classroom teacher, but also as a special education teacher. And that combination, I think, really appealed to the Tooten Hills faculty as someone who could come in with expertise in both areas and help them kind of move the school forward.
Okay, now you mentioned the Tooten Hills faculty. Were they involved in the interview process?
They are. Our process usually begins with focus groups, not only with faculty, but we typically involve parents in that as well. And talking about it starts with talking about the strengths of the school that currently exist, maybe some need areas, and then really qualities that you're looking for in the candidates. And those focus groups kind of develop a profile for us. And then as we screen candidates and conduct interviews, it's a little bit of an intimidating process because the candidate comes in and it's not interviewing with just a small panel. It's usually 8 faculty members are in a conference room, so it's a very comprehensive process. And we did 2 rounds of interviewing with stakeholders involved, faculty, secretaries in the building, parents. So everybody gets a say in kind of where it goes, but ultimately it's the superintendent who makes the recommendation to the Board of Ed.
Well, I met her. One of the wonderful things about doing this show is that I get to meet all these very interesting people, and I did get to interview her. So another thing that occupied you this summer, in addition to finding a new principal at the end of the summer, was some security issues, making school buildings safer. Can you tell us a little bit about what kind of things were happening?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of picking up on the work that Sue Lemke had led in the role before me, but obviously in the wake of the Newtown tragedy, there was certainly a push at the state level for school districts to be sure that their security plans, that their security processes were in order. And one of the things that happened is a pretty comprehensive overhaul of the formal plans that school districts have. So that work began with Sue Lemke, and I inherited it. So it involved some editing and revisions to our school security plans. It involved some training for our administrators to make sure that they were up to speed with all of our procedures. And it also involves training for faculty and even for students in our processes in the event of an emergency. So we've done a lot in the last few years, and right now our plans actually undergo an audit through the Department of Emergency Management at the state. And we made some revisions to our plan, and we think some favorable ones. Some suggestions had come back from the last review. We're making some changes, and believe when we receive those probably early in 2016 that they will be looked at favorably.
Well, I'm so old that when I was in school, the only thing that we ever did was to try and protect ourselves from a nuclear bomb when we would dive under the desk.
Under the desks, right.
So, but your training in the wake of Newtown and other things, it's much more extensive. There are lockdowns. And can you tell us a little bit about what the kids go through and what they learn? And
Sure. We actually worked with a security consulting firm in the wake of Newtown, and it was a firm from Colorado, ERS, Emergency Response Systems, and they actually had gotten their start after the Columbine tragedy.
yeah.
So they had been at it for a long time, and among the recommendations, we obviously had, we used to call them code red drills, which were kind of a version of a lockdown drill of locking into your classroom. And one of the things that group strongly recommended for the Simsbury Public Schools, and it's been in place for a while now, is something that's called Standard Response Protocol. So one of the things that I'll hold up for just a second with, I brought a prop here, is a visual that we put in literally every space,
classroom.
every classroom, every public space.
What to do in an emergency.
Yeah, so Standard Response Protocol really involves 4 procedures that teachers, students need to know inside and out. And they are lock out, lock down, shelter, and evacuate. So the one that is most practiced and most talked about, which is the lockdown, and that is what you think about if there were to be, God forbid, an intruder into the school. And it's practiced at least 3 times a year in every school in Simsbury. And when you conduct a lockdown drill, the principal or whoever is conducting the drill gives the command of lockdown and then locks lights out of sight. And those things are self-explanatory. It's lock the door, shut off the lights, and maintain silence.
Do they still go under the desks?
And out of sight means into a corner as best you
so
can.
that you can't be seen through the doorway.
As best you can, away from doorway and windows, which is not always possible given the setup of every single classroom. But it's really to get away from the door primarily. So that is a procedure that students are used to now. They practice and really take it. Obviously, I've been conducting these drills at the high school in my previous role, but to see it happen in the elementary schools as I've gone out in the first few months, taken very seriously, but I think that it's done in an age-appropriate manner. I mean, I've been able to see people explaining to students, calming them about what we're going to do. The first one of the year is typically pretty announced of this is what we're going to do, but then the rest are done just to test the procedure. In addition to that, lockdown is the most practiced, but we also do lock out, which is to secure the perimeter of the building, to lock out the entry doors, but otherwise to conduct the business of the school as is. We execute that probably most frequently when a bear appears in the neighborhood, and it's a situation we've actually used. And then the others are evacuate, which you might think of as your typical fire drill, but you might need to evacuate for other reasons. At the high school a few years ago, we evacuated for a small chemical spill, which turned out to be okay, but we did need to evacuate the building. And then the other is, the other command through Standard Response Protocol is shelter. So if you had a tornado in the area, or if there was a reason that you couldn't travel home, it's the idea of being able to shelter in place.
All right, so the tornado reminds me that you had a recent Emergency Operations Center simulation exercise to test Simsbury's readiness to deal with a tornado. Because we have some other guests coming, I want to do this really quick.
Sure.
So how did that work, and did you pass? Did you?
It was a really interesting experience for me. What happened is that the state asked every municipality to, as a simulation, call its emergency operations, open its emergency operations center, call its key personnel in, and they gave the clue that it would involve school safety plans. So asked for a school representation to be there. Since this is part of my job responsibilities, I went with our superintendent to the Emergency Operations Center, along with our First Selectman, Lisa Hevner, several members of the police, Kevin Kowalski. And what happened was that they fed you information about this emergency. All you knew going in was that there was a major storm kind of making its way from the Midwest toward Connecticut. And as you arrived, you were told that to imagine that it had hit Simsbury, and in fact, within an hour of it, you were told that a tornado had impacted and damaged your southernmost school in the district, which in our case was Latimer Lane. And you had to actually respond in real time. What would you do in terms of being able to get buses there in order to take attendance for all personnel? And we had to actually refer to our plans and said, in our emergency operations plans, were those processes clearly laid out? Not only was it an interesting experience, but I think it was a successful one, because as we went through the morning of doing this simulation, we really felt pretty confident that in the event of a disaster such as that, we would have the right people and right procedures in place.
Interesting, and I'm glad you learned some positive things. We're going to take a break right now, and when we come back, we're going to be joined by two Simsbury School Resource Officers and talk a little bit more about school safety and the role of the SRO, the School Resource Officer. Don't go away. We'll be right back. We're back, and Tim May, the Simsbury High School Resource Officer, and Todd Cushman, the SRO whose responsibilities are at the middle school and the elementary school, have joined us to talk a little bit more about security, school safety, and your jobs and Neil's job. Tim, my first question for you is, School Resource Officer is a sort of a vague title, but you're sitting here in uniforms, so I assume that means you are truly not social workers, but policemen, right?
Well, we are. Our main priority is we are police officers. We're within the school. Our number one priority is always the safety of the students. But on top of the safety for the students, our big thing is you heard about some of the exercises we do at the school that Neil spoke of earlier, is bringing the police aspect to the school, and we work as a team to determine how all of our policies and our procedures and all of our exercises are run well, so if there was ever any type of tragedy, we have a good game plan to move forward.
So you're actually Simsbury police officers then? You're hired by the Simsbury Police Department?
That is correct. Correct.
And Todd, your responsibilities, I said, are mostly at the elementary school and middle school?
Correct.
So is that where you report every day? How does your job go?
Well, it was a new position that came in when I started the assignment, so there was no actual schedule where they said a couple hours here, a couple hours there. It was kind of make it up as you go along. So how it's worked out, this is my third year, is I'm primarily at the middle school, but again, I venture out to the elementary schools to run programs, internet safety talks, so on and so forth. With them, it's a little easier to walk into a middle school classroom and not disrupt the whole process than it is an elementary school classroom. So we've kind of gauged it as time's gone by and what's been most successful. So majority of the times at the middle school, but I try and get to all the schools as much as I can.
So do you discuss things like stranger danger with them, or?
Stranger danger has evolved into more an internet safety and social media type talk. Stranger danger was that term when most kids were outside even playing.
But now
in their
there's stranger
neighborhoods,
danger on the internet.
Stranger danger has evolved into online. So really the heavy majority of talking to kids now as far as the stranger danger thing is really about being on the internet, whether it's through their video games, whether it's on their new technology. And we have kids in town that are third, second grade that have cell phones with internet capability. So that's really what we've kind of shifted our focus to, is making them alert and their parents to the fact that all these things we talked about in stranger danger are now available on the internet.
So Tim, I asked Todd how his day goes. How does your day go? Do you show up at the school? Are you there every day?
Yeah, I'm at the school every day. For the most part, the full school hours. Big part for me is to just be available to students, be seen. I go to every lunch wave. But one of my favorite things to do is to get inside the classrooms. So I've been used in all different ways in the classrooms, whether it's the health class for drug awareness, or it's the law classes to teach about criminal justice. I've been into Spanish classes to talk about Latin American culture. I've been in all kinds of different used in all different roles. But my favorite thing is probably to get access to the students so that they see that I am more, not just a police officer there for the safety aspects, but also show them a little more of my, personal side, be able to teach them, and it's great interaction.
So now you raised the issue of drugs, and I wanted I know, Neil, that you dealt with that a lot as principal of the high school, and I know there are a lot of parents who are very interested in this subject. Drugs and alcohol in the school. I think I've read that you introduced the breathalyzer to the high school at school dances, or
Yeah.
how does that work?
So it was after a situation where we had a prom where a busload of students came and under the influence of alcohol. It was a very unfortunate, very public event here in town, got a lot of media coverage. And we did some research about some other schools that had introduced breathalyzers at an entry point to a dance. Talked it over with our parent groups, talked it over with some faculty representative groups, and really decided that it was kind of the right move for us at that point to, as an entry point to dances, make sure that students were going to pass through. It's called a passive alcohol screen. It's not a formal breathalyzer. It actually is a device that you just kind of step up to it and you say, you recite your ABCs or something. You just have to talk, and it does a certain level of screening. If it does detect anything, it can go to a more specific level, but we have not had to use it because what it tells you, students know you're going to do it and they don't try. And so in that sense, it proved a deterrent. School dances had been a place where kids would try to push the boundaries. And we said, having had some situations where safety was compromised, we said it was the right step for us. It's been in place, I want to say, for about 8 years now, since we first instituted it. It is standard operating procedure at our dances now. Kids know what's going to happen. They don't think twice about it, and as a result, our dances have turned into terrific and safe events.
So are you there at those events? Are you
Yes.
operating it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Typically, I'm at any type of the major events, like the football game we just had
Right.
on Tuesday. So I don't operate them. We have a very good security team that operates them as they come in, but I'm there in case they need anything further. But it's been a very successful operation, and it's worked out very well.
Interesting. So now we talked a little bit about alcohol. Let's move on to drugs. The first time I just mentioned to you before we went on the air, the first time I saw you too was making a presentation on drugs and the kind of things that the students even in a suburban town like ours are faced with and may or may not be using. How big a problem is it in the schools?
I wouldn't say it's any different than any other town, any other school system. It's how are you going to deal with it? And the fact that we're in the school system and working well with the administrators, that's how you make a difference. So the fact that we work as a team, the school and the police department, you can't deny that there's not drugs in Simsbury, because then you'd just be fooling yourself. But it's how do you make the community aware of it? Like you said, we had the Community for Concerns presentation. How do we let the students be aware of it? That's why we go into the classrooms as much as we do. And then we also meet with the administration at the schools to say, how can we make sure that we're doing the most that we can to bring the awareness, to give the kids the outlets, and prep them to be ready to make good decisions.
Every time the subject of drugs comes up, there's a big social media discussion in Simsbury, and I'm sure in other towns as well. And a lot of parents say, well, what happened to the DARE program? Why don't we have it? And I remember the DARE program used to be there, and then it was given up because it wasn't seen as effective, or correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, the DARE program went out of existence prior to us starting in our roles.
Right.
But the overall gist was it wasn't making the impact that it was intended to make.
Right.
So, I mean, and what Tim had talked about, us being in the schools, for an example, with the stranger danger, with the community of care presentation, we tried to give a realistic point of view of, again, our first role is a police officer. We've now been assigned to the schools, so we bring the knowledge of the police department being out on the road and what we're seeing, what kids are involved in. So we're able to take that into the school, community care, and kind of share what we're seeing, what we should be looking for. And now working with the schools, advising them, hey, this is what we're seeing out there, so we have to be aware that we may be on the lookout for more of these things.
Right. Tim mentioned earlier the visits to health classrooms. Obviously, our school resource officers are incredibly valuable resources going in there, but we have health teachers who there is a curriculum. I believe it starts in 6th grade, goes right through the middle school and high school, and educates kids about various substances and their impact and their long-term negative effects. So certainly I think that program, which is part of our curriculum, is essential, and our school resource officers have been a terrific addition in bringing, I think, some street credibility, if you will, to that.
Okay, so recently it made headlines. There was an incident where a student or multiple students sold marijuana-laced brownies on a bus on a school trip.
Right.
And we heard that the student was expelled. So how did, I know you can't talk about the specific student, but I heard that this happened on the bus to Salem, and so what happened there, and how was it uncovered?
I'm limited in what I can talk about in terms of the details, since this is a community television program. But obviously, I think when you're in schools, you know that adolescents, it's a time of life where they're going to experiment, and so. I would say we by and large do an excellent job suppressing drugs from the school environment. Not to say that students may not be using on the weekends, but in general, we do a good job suppressing it in the school environment. On that particular day, we did not. And a student, a group of students had some stuff that they should not have had. I think what speaks well about our system is that it did come to light, that the secret wasn't held, and we were able to get the students involved safely, dealt with in terms of first their health and what needed to be taken care of on a very difficult, if you can imagine, a field trip's a difficult place for that to go down, and our personnel who were in place did an excellent job. Tim responded to the scene.
Did you actually go up there?
I did, yes.
So was extraordinarily helpful. And then we dealt with the safety of the students, dealt with the communication with their parents, and then down the road dealt with the consequences. And that's a part I can't really talk about, but I really do feel like in an unfortunate circumstance, Simsbury High doesn't want to be in the papers for that kind of stuff, but it happens. I feel like we dealt with it and kind of moving forward, which is not to say that it doesn't say, hey, we've got some more educational efforts to go here, and I think we've done a good job with that, but there's always more to do.
Well, on that note, positive note, I want to thank you both for coming, and you too, Neil, for this has been a very interesting conversation, and I think we could have gone on for an hour. I don't think we even touched the surface. I'd like to thank everyone here at SCTV behind the scenes for their help in getting the show on the air. And of course, thank you for watching. If you missed any part of the show, you can always watch it on our website. Just go to simsburytv.org, where you can also see the schedule of when shows air on SCTV's 3 channels, 5, 95, and 96. I'm Dominique Avery. See you next time for Simsbury School News.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.